In 2011, a team of climate scientists at Stanford and the Max Planck Institute published a paper with a finding that stopped people mid-sentence at conferences. The Mongol conquests of the 13th century killed so many human beings that farmland across Asia reverted to forest. Those regrowing forests pulled roughly 700 million tons of carbon out of the atmosphere. That is equivalent to the world's total annual demand for gasoline today. One man's wars literally cooled the planet. That man was afraid of dogs. The Secret History of the Mongols, the only source written by Mongols themselves, records that the boy who would become Genghis Khan had a genuine phobia of dogs as a child. His father Yasuge told his future in-laws directly, "My son is afraid of dogs. Do not let him be frightened by them." This was not some irrational quirk. Mongolian steppe dogs were massive animals bred to fight wolves and guard livestock. They killed people. Still, the image sits oddly against everything that came later. A boy flinching from dogs on the steppe near the Undone River, somewhere around 1162, who would grow up to be responsible for the deaths of roughly 40 million people, maybe more, at a time when the entire world held about 400 million. That is approximately 10% of every person alive. We need to go back before the killing started because the killing did not come from nowhere. Temujin, his birth name, entered the world clutching a blood clot the size of a knucklebone in his right fist. The Mongols read this as an omen that the child would become a great warrior. His mother Holan had been kidnapped from her first husband, a Merkit tribesman, by Temujin's father Yasuge. Bride kidnapping was a recognized practice on the steppe. Violent, yes, but within the rules of the world they lived in. That single kidnapping set off a chain of revenge that would reshape Temujin's entire life and eventually the succession of the largest land empire in history. But we will get to that. When Temujin was 8 or 9, his father accepted food at a Tatar feast and was poisoned. Accepting food from enemies was a gesture of trust. The Tatars violated it. After Yasuge died, his clan abandoned the widow and her children on the open steppe. This was a death sentence delivered without anyone having to swing a blade. Holan and her sons survived on roots, fish, marmots, and wild onions. They ate what they could catch and dug up what they could not. Around 13 or 14, Temujin and his brother Khasar killed their half-brother Behter over a dispute about sharing hunting spoils, a fish and a lark. They stalked him and shot him with arrows. Behter reportedly told them, "Now you have no companion other than your shadow." His mother Holan was furious. She screamed at her sons, comparing them to dogs eating their own afterbirth, to attacking panthers, to lions with no control. The thing that strikes historians is that this episode was not edited out of the secret history, even though that text was written to glorify Genghis Khan. The killing was considered formative. It showed his willingness to remove threats to his authority, even inside his own family. He was barely a teenager. Then came capture. The Taichi Ud clan fitted him with a kangwei, a heavy wooden pillory that locked around the neck and wrists. He could not feed himself. He could not sleep comfortably. They paraded him from camp to camp. During a feast under a full moon, when his guard was a weak youth, Temujin struck the boy with the kange itself and ran. He hid in a river, submerged to his face. A man named Sorkhan Shira and his sons found him and hid him in a wool cart, risking their own lives. Sorkhan Shira had already been secretly removing the kange at night so Temujin could rest. He did not give the boy fire-making tools when he sent him on his way, probably to make sure he kept moving instead of camping near his captors. Years later, when Temujin became Genghis Khan, he rewarded the Suldus family lavishly. Loyalty repaid became one of the principles that built his empire. Then came the kidnapping that broke everything open. Temujin married Borte, a girl he had been betrothed to since childhood. Shortly after the wedding, the Merkits raided their camp and took her. This was explicit revenge for Yasuge kidnapping Hoelun from the Merkits a generation earlier. Borte was held captive for about 8 months and given to a Merkit man as a wife. Temujin rescued her with help from his blood brother Yamuka and his patron Togrul, the Onkan. Borte gave birth to her first son Yoshi suspiciously soon after the rescue. The question of paternity was never resolved. Temujin claimed Yoshi publicly. His second son, Chagatai, openly called Yoshi a bastard son of a Merkit. The secret history recorded this insult without flinching. The dispute meant neither Yochi nor Chagatai could inherit leadership without the other contesting it. Temujin eventually chose his third son, Ogedei, as successor specifically to sidestep the conflict. One kidnapping 2 generations back reshaped who controlled an empire stretching from Korea to Hungary. The Blood Brotherhood with Jamuka. They first became Anda, blood brothers, around age 11. They exchanged knucklebones and arrows and swore oaths of lifelong loyalty. They renewed the pact as adults after Borte's rescue. Then their alliance collapsed. Jamuka believed in aristocratic rule through noble bloodlines. Temujin promoted based on merit and loyalty. That disagreement split the Mongol tribes and led to years of war between former brothers. After losing the power struggle, Jamuka was betrayed by his own followers and brought to Temujin. Offered mercy, he refused and asked to die honourably, without spilling blood, which was the noble way in Mongol custom. His back was broken. Temujin reportedly buried him with the golden belt he had given Jamuka when they first became blood brothers as boys. Even in death, he honoured the childhood bond. In 1203, at the Battle of Kalakaljit Sands, everything nearly ended before it started. Temujin was crushed by his former patron Togrul, who had been turned against him by his own son Sengum. The defeat was total. Temujin fled with a handful of survivors to Lake Baljuna in southeastern Mongolia, a muddy body of water in the middle of nowhere. According to the Yuan Shi, he had only 19 companions left, though this likely refers to company leaders rather than total followers. Even so, 19 leaders is nothing. A year earlier, he had commanded thousands. They were starving. A wild horse appeared, the kind of luck that only matters when you are desperate enough for it to count. They killed it, ate its flesh, and filtered the muddy water through parts of its body. Temujin raised his hand to the sky and swore that if he finished the great work he would share with these men the sweet and the bitter, and if he broke his word let him become as that muddy water. The men who swore that oath, the Baljunatu, the muddy water drinkers, came from 9 different tribes. They included Christians, Muslims and Buddhists. The empire that would reshape the world began with a multi-ethnic, multi-religious band of starving men around a dead horse at a muddy lake. 3 years later, Temujin had defeated all rivals and was proclaimed Genghis Khan at a great assembly on the banks of the Undone River. The Baljunatu received the highest titles in the new empire, from 19 starving men to the largest contiguous land empire in human history. 3 years. What made his army different from every steppe confederation that had come before was its structure. He organised by a decimal system, units of 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. He deliberately mixed tribal affiliations within units. A squad of 10 men might contain warriors from 5 different tribes. This destroyed old loyalties and replaced them with loyalty to the unit and to the Khan. If one man in a squad of 10 deserted, all 10 were executed. If one squad fled battle, the entire company of 100 faced punishment. Collective punishment was not a side effect of the system. It was the system. The Keshig, his imperial guard, started at 150 men and grew to 10,000. It split into a day guard and a night guard. A common member of the Keshig outranked a commander of 1,000 men outside it, and it served a triple purpose that no other ruler of the period could match. It was an elite military force drawn from the best warriors of every tribe. It was a hostage system, because the sons of tribal leaders served in the Keshig, and if their fathers rebelled, those sons were already in the Khan's hands. And it was a bureaucratic training school. Keshig members went on to become governors, administrators, and diplomats across the empire. The annual winter hunt, the Nurj, was not sport. It was a full-scale military exercise lasting weeks. Thousands of riders would form a ring, sometimes 80 miles across, and slowly compress it, driving every animal in the region toward the centre. Communication ran through flag signals, mounted messengers, and smoke. Strict rules governed who could kill what and when. The Khan made the first kill. Any man who let an animal escape the ring through his section was punished. The coordination required to hold that ring intact across mountain passes, river valleys, and open steppe, with thousands of men maintaining spacing for weeks, was the same coordination required to encircle an army. The Nurj was a war rehearsal with fur instead of blood. Every soldier carried borts, air-dried ground meat that lasted months, spare bowstrings, arrowhead files, a lasso, and a waterproof saddlebag made from a cow's stomach that doubled as a flotation device for river crossings. Each man kept 3 to 5 spare horses and rotated between them so no animal was exhausted. A unit of 1,000 men was completely self-sustaining. No supply wagons. Mongol armies moved at cavalry speed while European forces crawled at the pace of their ox carts. They even had a battlefield communication system based on whistling arrows, perforated arrowheads that screamed in flight. Different patterns meant different orders. Combined with black and white flags, smoke signals, and massive war drums mounted on camels that could be heard over great distances, they could coordinate tens of thousands of riders across terrain, where no European army could have managed a fraction of that number. The YAM, the postal relay system, gave Genghis Khan something no rival possessed: speed of information. Relay stations spaced every 25 to 30 miles across the empire, with fresh horses maintained at every stop. Riders carried a paisa, a metal tablet that served as a passport. Messages could travel more than 200 miles in a single day. He knew what was happening across his territory faster than any enemy could send a warning. Their signature battlefield tactic was the mangudai, the feigned retreat. A vanguard would attack, then fake a panicked withdrawal. Pursuing enemies would break formation chasing them, straight into a prepared ambush. They sometimes maintained the fake retreat for days. At the Battle of the Khalkha River in 1223, the General Subutai feigned retreat for 9 days, before springing the trap on the combined Russian and Kipchak army. European and Middle Eastern commanders could not conceive that retreat was a deliberate strategy. When they saw Mongols running, they assumed they had won. They had not. When encircling an enemy force, the Mongols would deliberately leave one side open. This seems counterintuitive. Fully surrounded men fight with the desperation of the doomed. Men who see an exit fight less fiercely and eventually break for the gap. The fleeing soldiers were then pursued and slaughtered in the open, disorganized and panicking. The gap was not mercy. It was a more efficient form of killing. Before arriving at a city, they sent merchants and spies to spread terror. They inflated their own numbers. They allowed refugees to flee so those refugees would carry stories of massacre to the next target. They forced captured civilians from previously conquered cities to march ahead of the army as human shields and arrow fodder. These captives, called the kasha, filled moats, carried siege equipment, and dug trenches under fire. At some cities, Mongol forces lit extra campfires at night to make their army appear many times larger than it was. The siege engineering is where most people get confused, because how do horse-riding nomads who have never seen a walled city learn to break down walls? They captured engineers. Chinese, Persian, and Central Asian specialists were enslaved and put to work. At Urgench, they diverted the Amudarya River to flood the city. They used Chinese-style catapults and trebuchets. They launched naphtha, an early form of napalm, over walls. They dug tunnels under fortifications and collapsed them with fire. They created smoke screens from burning wet materials. This was not a horde smashing blindly at gates. It was a military machine that absorbed the technology of every civilization it swallowed and turned it on the next one. One of the first cities to feel the full weight of this machine was Zhongdu, modern Beijing, one of the largest cities in the world, protected by triple walls and a garrison of tens of thousands. The first siege in 1213 failed. The Mongols did not yet have the engineering capability to breach those defences. They came back in 1215, and this time they did not need to breach anything. They waited. The city starved. There are reports of cannibalism inside the walls in the final weeks. When it fell, the city burned for a month. Not days. A month. A Khwarezmian ambassador who visited the ruins afterward reported that the ground was greasy with human fat and that the bones of the slaughtered formed white hills outside the walls. That description comes from a man who had no reason to exaggerate in the Mongols' favour. He was from the Khwarezmian Empire, the next target on the list. He was looking at his own future and did not know it. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan of about 450 merchants, mostly Muslim, to the Khwarezmian Empire. The governor of Otrar, a man named Inalchuk, accused them of spying. With Shah Muhammad's approval, he executed the entire caravan and seized the goods. Genghis Khan sent 3 ambassadors to demand justice. Shah Muhammad beheaded the Muslim ambassador and shaved the beards of the 2 Mongol ambassadors, a profound insult, and sent them back. This was the provocation that launched the most devastating military campaign of the medieval period. After a siege lasting more than 5 months, Otrar fell and Inalchuk was captured. Some later sources claim he was executed by having molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, symbolising his greed in seizing the caravan. Modern historians call this almost certainly apocryphal. The symbolism of silver equaling greed is too neat, too perfect for a morality tale. He was definitely killed. The specific method is unverified. Bukhara fell in February 1220. The city held somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 people. Genghis Khan reportedly rode his horse into the main mosque and told his soldiers to loot freely. He gathered the wealthy merchants and told them their sins had brought divine punishment upon them. He presented himself as an instrument of God's retribution. The city burned. Artisans and skilled workers were spared and redistributed across the empire as useful labour. Everyone else was killed or enslaved. Samarkand fell the following month. The garrison was killed, but civilians were treated with relative leniency by Mongol standards, meaning they were enslaved rather than massacred. Between 30,000 and 50,000 people died, mostly soldiers and those who resisted. Merv, February 12, 21. This might have been one of the largest cities in the world at the time. Population estimates range from 200,000 to over 1 million. The medieval chronicler Ibn al-Athir reports 700,000 killed. Juvayni, a Persian historian who later visited Mongol-conquered lands himself, reports even higher, over 1.3 million. Modern scholars say these numbers are vastly exaggerated. The city likely could not have supported that many people. Current estimates suggest 100,000 to 200,000 casualties. Still catastrophic. Still the annihilation of a major world city in a matter of days. Medieval chroniclers had their own reasons to inflate the count. Higher numbers amplified both the tragedy and the narrative that the Mongols were divine punishment sent by God. Nishapur, April 1221. Tolui, the youngest son of Genghis Khan, led this assault. The Mongols had lost a general named Tokuchar during an earlier attack on the city, and the army was enraged. After breaching the walls, every living thing in the city was killed. Chroniclers report that the slaughter extended to cats and dogs. Severed heads were stacked in separate pyramids. Men in one pile, women in another, children in a third. Reported death tolls of over 1.7 million are considered extreme exaggeration by modern scholars. But whatever the real number was, it was enough to build pyramids from the heads, and sort them by age and sex while doing it. Then Bamyan. During the siege of Bamyan in 1221, a stray arrow killed Mutukan, Genghis Khan's favourite grandson, the son of Chagatai. Genghis Khan was so enraged that he ordered every living thing in the city killed. He forbade anyone from ever living there again. The city was renamed Maobalig, meaning cursed city. Bamyan is the same place later famous for its giant Buddhist statues, the ones the Taliban destroyed in 2001. Layers of destruction from different centuries stacked on top of each other in the same valley. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan had sent two of his best generals, Jebe and Subutai, with 20,000 to 30,000 men to chase Shah Muhammad across half of Asia. The pursuit went from Uzbekistan across northern Iran, through the Caucasus, into the Russian steppe. Muhammad abandoned cities, abandoned armies, abandoned everything. He died of pneumonia on an island in the Caspian Sea in December 1220, abandoned by everyone, reportedly wearing nothing but rags. The most powerful man in the Islamic world died cold and alone on an island, while his empire burned behind him. And Jebe and Subutai kept going. While chasing him, they fought their way through Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan. They defeated the Georgians. They pushed through the Caucasus passes, and in May 1223, they destroyed a combined Russian Kipchak army at the Kalka River. That battle was Europe's first encounter with the Mongols, and Europe lost badly. The entire expedition lasted about 3 years and covered thousands of miles. It was supposed to be a pursuit mission. It accidentally turned into a reconnaissance of half the known world. After the Kalka River victory, the captured Rus princes received what the Mongols considered an honourable death. They were placed under a heavy wooden platform. The Mongol generals sat on top of it and ate their victory feast, crushing the princes to death beneath them over the course of the meal. In Mongol custom, the blood of royalty and nobility was sacred and could not touch the ground. So they found ways to kill that avoided cutting. Princes were rolled in carpets or felt and trampled by horses. Backs were broken by bending. This same logic governed executions for decades. When Genghis Khan's grandson Hulegu conquered Baghdad in 1258, he wrapped the Caliph al-Mustasim in a carpet before having horses ride over him. At Baghdad, the House of Wisdom, which held centuries of accumulated knowledge from Greek, Persian, Indian, and Arab scholars, was destroyed. The Tigris River reportedly ran black with ink from destroyed books, then red with blood. Estimates of the dead range from 90,000 at the lowest to over 1 million at the highest. That single event ended the Abbasid Caliphate after 500 years and is still remembered as one of the most devastating moments in Islamic civilization. Hulagu was carrying out the logic his grandfather had built. One moment of genuine admiration broke through the violence. Muhammad's son Jalal ad-Din was far more capable than his father and actually defeated a Mongol force at the Battle of Parwan, one of the very few Mongol defeats during Genghis Khan's lifetime. When the Mongol army caught up with him at the Indus River, Jalal ad-Din had no boats and no way across. So he rode his horse off a high bluff into the river, fully armoured, holding his banner high, and swam across under a hail of arrows. The drop was significant. The river was fast, and he made it. Genghis Khan watched this happen from the bank. Rather than being angry at losing his quarry, he pointed Jalal ad-Din out to his sons and said a father should have such a son. He reportedly restrained his own archers from shooting at the man in the water. Respect for raw courage mattered to him, even in an enemy. The women of Jalal ad-Din's household who did not make it across threw themselves into the river rather than be captured. They chose drowning over what they knew would follow. Near the end of his life, in 1222, Genghis Khan did something that seems almost impossible to reconcile with everything else. He summoned a 73-year-old Daoist monk named Chu Chuji. The monk travelled roughly 3,500 miles from Shandong, China, to the Hindu Kush, a journey that took over a year across some of the most difficult terrain in Asia. Genghis Khan asked him 3 questions. Does the Philosopher's Stone exist? No. Is there a potion of immortality? No, but there are methods of prolonging life. How do I prolong my life? Respect and love your people. Chu Chuji advised restraint, less killing, and the practice of virtue. Genghis Khan gave him the title Spirit Immortal and put him in charge of all religious persons in the empire. He made a philosopher the administrator of every priest, monk, imam, and shaman in his territory. Their conversations were recorded by the monk's disciple Li Jichang. The conqueror who built skull pyramids at Nishapur was, at least for a few months, genuinely interested in how to live longer through kindness. Whether any of that advice changed a single decision he made afterward is another question entirely. One campaign sits apart from all the others in its completeness, and it barely gets mentioned in most accounts. The Western Xia kingdom of the Tanguts had been a Mongol vassal, but refused to send troops for the Khwarezmian War. Genghis Khan took this personally. On his deathbed in 1227, he reportedly ordered his generals to exterminate them, not defeat them, not subjugate them, exterminate them. The capital Yinchuan was destroyed. Most of its population was massacred. The historian John Mann has written that there is a case to be made that this was the first recorded example of attempted genocide, and that it was certainly very successful ethnocide. Small groups of Tangut people escaped to western Sichuan, northern Tibet, and possibly northeast India. Remnants persisted into the Ming dynasty, but as a civilization, their cities, records, literature, and identity were erased so thoroughly that most people today have never heard of Western Xia. You can go through an entire world history education and never encounter the name. That obscurity is itself the evidence of how completely the order was carried out. His legal code, the Yasa, tells you something about the mind behind all of this. Death penalty for urinating in running water, because water was sacred on the steppe. Death for washing clothes in streams. Death for stealing a horse. With the body cut in 2. Death for adultery, regardless of status. Hunting was forbidden during breeding season. Proto-environmental regulations 7 centuries before anyone coined the term. All religious leaders of any faith, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Daoist, were exempt from taxation. Modern scholars believe many of these death penalty provisions were aspirational, rather than consistently enforced, designed to make behaviours culturally unacceptable over time, the way jaywalking laws exist today but are almost never prosecuted. Genghis Khan was personally illiterate his entire life. He never learned to read or write, yet after defeating the Naimans in 1204, he captured a Uyghur scribe named Tatatonga and ordered the creation of a Mongolian writing system. Tatatonga adapted the old Uyghur alphabet to write Mongolian. The script runs vertically, top to bottom, left to right, the only surviving vertical script written in that direction. It remains in use in Inner Mongolia today. A few things people think they know about Genghis Khan turn out to be wrong. That famous quote about the greatest pleasure being to vanquish your enemies, chase them before you, rob them of their wealth, and see their loved ones bathed in tears does not appear in the secret history of the Mongols. It shows up in later secondary sources and 19th century Western retellings. The attribution is disputed. The claim that he had red hair and green eyes is based on translation errors. The original Persian in Rashid al-Din uses a word meaning ruddy complexion, not red hair. Cat-eyed was mistranslated as green-eyed in early French translations. What the sources actually describe is a tall, broad-shouldered man with a long beard and distinctive eyes of unknown colour. The famous claim that 16 million men alive today carry his genetic legacy is scientifically challenged. A 2003 study found a Y chromosomal lineage in about 8% of Central Asian men. A 2018 Chinese study examining 18,000 individuals found that the lineage is actually about 2,600 years old, predating Genghis Khan by over a millennium. None of the self-claimed direct descendants of Genghis Khan carry this particular genetic marker. The headline was too good to resist, but the science no longer supports it. The standard story that Mongol destruction turned Central Asia's irrigated farmland to permanent desert also needs correcting. A 2020 Oxford study published in PNMS found that canal abandonment began more than 200 years before the Mongol invasion, during a prolonged dry period. The Mongols did damage waterworks. They famously flooded Urgench by diverting the Amu Darya, but this was localised. What the Mongol destruction did was reduce the population so severely that there were not enough people left to repair the irrigation systems when the climate eventually improved. The invasion did not create the problem. It made the problem permanent. He died on August 18, 1227, during the campaign against Western Xia. Nobody knows exactly how. Chinese and Mongol sources say he fell from his horse while hunting, which for a 65-year-old man on an active military campaign is entirely plausible. A 2021 study in the International Journal of Infectious Diseases suggests bubonic plague, noting that his army was experiencing an outbreak at the time and his physician was collecting rhubarb, a known treatment for plague symptoms in that era. A 17th century Mongol chronicle claims a Tangut princess killed him, possibly by castration, but that story appeared 500 years after the event and is considered hostile propaganda from rival groups. The plague theory is currently the most evidence-based explanation, but we may never know for certain. His burial is unknown. He was likely interred in an unmarked grave in the Khenti Mountains of Mongolia, near his birthplace. Later legends claim the funeral escort killed everyone they met along the route, that a river was diverted over the grave, that 800 horsemen trampled the site, and that everyone who attended was then killed by a second group, who were themselves killed by a third. The historian Jack Weatherford states flatly that none of this is based on a shred of evidence. Marco Polo's account of a Mongol funeral massacre actually describes the burial of Monkey Khan, a grandson, not Genghis himself. The two were conflated over the centuries. His tomb has never been found. The historian Stephen Ward estimates that Iran's population did not recover to pre-Mongol levels until the mid-20th century, 700 years to replace the dead. Think about what that means. Iran did not have as many people as it had before the Mongols until roughly the 1950s. The destruction of Qanat irrigation systems and the sheer reduction in human population turned previously fertile areas of Iran and Central Asia into desert that never recovered. Cities that had been centres of learning and commerce for centuries became ruins, and some of those ruins are still visible today. During the Soviet era, from 1924 to 1990, Genghis Khan's name was effectively banned in Mongolia. He was dismissed as a reactionary. His story was removed from school textbooks. After the Democratic Revolution in 1990, everything reversed. His face went on every denomination of Mongolian currency. An international airport took his name. In 2009, a 131-foot stainless steel statue of him on horseback went up outside Ulaanbaatar. He's a national hero in Mongolia. In Iran and the Arab world, he's remembered as one of history's greatest destroyers. Both descriptions are accurate. Neither is complete.